right, we have the whole gang here today. Francisco, we're gonna, just so everyone else knows, where are you calling from, sir?
I'm calling from Santiago of Chile.
Okay, we're gonna jump to Chile, right? And let's hear from you, sir. We're gonna start our elevator pitch. Okay, I'll introduce myself and you'll have 1 minute to give your pitch, right? And for everyone that's in the crowd, please feel free to continue to give your feedback. Your feedback is very welcome as part of the process. Okay, Francisco, are you ready, sir?
Yes, I'm ready.
All right, Francisco, my name is Singh. I am part of a fourth generation Chilean family that's made most of their money on coffee and mining. We're now looking to invest in startups. Tell us about what you're working on.
Okay, hi, Ash. My name is Francisco. I'm the founder and CEO of MOVIA. So MOVIA matches supply chain decarbonization needs with green investments. Okay. You know that supply chain emissions generated by land transport are nearly a third of the total carbon emissions worldwide and constitute over 80% of corporations' total carbon footprint. That's huge. They're caused mainly by many small and medium-sized suppliers that lack the expertise or the financial strength to independently implement decarbonization initiatives. So, to bring them to net zero, corporations need to invest, on average, 30% more of the next decades. So, our goal is to be the world's leading financial platform for supply chain decarbonization, and we will get there in 4 steps. Step 1, we will get fuel consumption data for free from GPS players in the supply chain. In exchange, we will add value to them as more sustainable partners selling MOVIA's software as a service. Today, we have a partnership with Wetfleet, one of the world's leading supply chain GPS players, with plus 2 million vehicles connected. Step 2, through our artificial intelligence and data from third-party GPS, we help corporations to cost-effectively reduce value chain emissions by discovering the best projects to mitigate emissions through our enterprise software called MOVIA Zero. Step 3, match those projects with all the key metrics with investors financing green projects, the biggest investment trend for the next decades, through our financial software called MOVIA Green. And step 4, measure and communicate those projects' economic and environmental impact, creating momentum for the next projects to be financed through MOVIA. Thus, we are building a platform business with network effects to decarbonize supply chain worldwide. We are raising $500,000 in a seed round through a follow-up investment of 100, 200, and 300, each of them but for a 7% of equity to expand MOVIA overseas, pointing to go global within the next 5 years.
Got it.
Thanks.
So Francisco, you went a little bit long. It was a little bit more than a minute. Okay.
Yeah, no, sorry.
So couple of things, and I want to get some feedback from Mitch and Paul on this because I want to make sure this is a little tighter. But step 1, Francisco, make sure that you're focused on the camera. Do you get what I'm saying? When you are talking, when we're looking, like, just make sure your eyes are focused on the camera so that it's just kind of brings a lot more presence and energy. You know, we live in this virtual world now, so that's important. But Paul and Mitch, let's get some feedback, right? Mr. Bradley, maybe you can kick off and start with some feedback on this. Mitch, over to you, sir. Go ahead.
So I pay a lot of attention to carbon tracking, and I think you over-explained. It's a pretty simple thing, is that you're going to solve the scope 3 emissions problem for distribution of materials, goods and materials, that by filling that gap, you can create a more efficient distribution system and a reportable, trackable one. One of the things that I was immediately curious about is the cadence of your reporting. Is this real-time reporting of carbon emissions, hourly reporting, weekly, monthly? How? And the closer you can get to real time, the more compelling the argument. So can you tell me a little more about what's involved in integrating this? Is it simply a matter of choosing to use one of your truckers and therefore you are plugged in, or do I need to adopt a platform and then through the platform choose truckers?
Yeah, well, that's the beauty of MOVIA. That's where it's actually kind of a new twist that we gave. And we started using our devices to track vehicles. But we understood that there's another players much more bigger than us doing that, but they are not using that data to carbon purposes, for carbon accounting, for example. So we are partnering with them using their data, their devices, and they are becoming our retailers. So, for example, Wetflip is selling right now MOVIAs because they don't have the solution for carbon accounting. And with data of them in real time, we give real-time carbon emissions without putting devices in vehicles. And we got just 2 million vehicles right now with our Wetflip agreement. So I think that's the way to do it in a very fast way.
Got it. I want to just come back to this because I want to, you know, ideally, right, Mitch, because his pitch was almost four minutes long, right? Mitch, I want to come back and I want to make sure he gets a chance to do it right. Does that make sense? Because and so today, instead of maybe doing the pitch back with Francisco, let's talk a little bit about, because you talked about simplifying it, right? You talked about kind of the scope 3 component. Can we just elaborate on it? Let's give him the sound bites that he needs, okay? And then what we can do is we can have him come back on the tail end of the program. We can get him to come back because I want to, do you know what I mean? I want to be able to have the right meat on this, right? Because we want to do apples to apples, right? Today was more of a presentation versus an elevator pitch, right? So Mitch, tell me a little bit about your thoughts on the sound bites that would work really well for you, right? You started off already. Go ahead.
Solving the scope 3 emissions measurement challenge is your key value proposition. And so that is what I would start with. Companies have struggled to move past scope 1 and 2 to scope 3. We solve that problem with regard to your transportation issues immediately. It's a switch on rather than a long-term investment and onboarding process. So we can help you begin to report scope 3 emissions in the way that other organizations will promise to do in 2 to 5 years.
Got it. And Mitch, just for the listeners, because we have thousands of listeners, for those of you that don't know scope 1 and scope 2, can you just elaborate a little bit for everybody? So
scope 1 is what you immediately generate through your operations. Scope 2 is the incidental operational emissions. So your power supply, for instance, if it's renewable or not, has a significant impact on your emissions. But scope 3 is everything else up and downstream in your supply chain. And in order to comply with evolving reporting requirements, both in Europe and the United States at this point, but which will spread eventually globally, you need to be able to account for the entire value chain end to end. Got it. And so everyone knows about kind of the carbon credits and all the other components around that. A lot of these companies don't actually have a full understanding of what their carbon emissions actually are from a scope 3 perspective, right? And they're not able to almost no one,
right? Got it. And so coming back to Mitch, and I'm just going to continue with you, if I may, before we go to Mr. Bradley. How do you see MOVIA's plan, like in simple terms? How do you see them addressing it with their platform? What do you think is their secret sauce? Were you able to capture that?
I'm still working through it as I think about it because of the 4 different facets of the business that you described.
So Francisco, VCs like us, we're not that smart. Do you know what I mean? Like we can do 1, 2. Oh, sorry. Paul and Mitch are very smart, but VCs like me are not that smart. So I got the first 2, and then I'm like, do I write this down? And I'm in an elevator, so I don't really know. Is that fair, Mitch? Right? You know?
Yeah. Well, I as I said earlier too, it's paint a picture. Make it simple, because the easier it is to grasp the idea, the more the investor or anybody, your potential customer, is going to start to think about how they can use it.
Yes, absolutely. So let's try to break that down, Francisco. If we have to describe it, right, the value proposition for scope 3 emissions, right, and how important this is, right? Tell us a little bit more, like if we can combine it together so it's clear as a starting point. Go ahead.
Okay, so MOVIAs solve the scope 3 carbon accounting by using GPS data from third parties to report in real time and to manage those emissions to reduce them cost effectively.
Got it. Got it. So does that make sense a little bit more, Mitch?
Bingo.
Okay. Okay. There you go. Boom. Boom. We got it. Okay. So so the idea of using third-party GPS, right? Okay.
Yes.
And real time. Okay.
Yes.
Mr. Bradley, what are your thoughts on this, sir?
Too many, too many details confuse the investor. And so I heard you talk about you have technology to bring visibility of carbon emissions for the trucking industry. And then you went off really quick into 1, 2, 3, 4. And I was like, if I'm an investor, I'm lost. You lost me. And so you actually gave too much information too quickly. And again, pacing this is important as well. But there are different messages. One is, and Mitch, you brought in level 3, and some investors may know that if they're purely focused on environmental and others
Right.
don't. So again, you got to explain that out, like Mitch explained, 1, 2, 3. But it's more than that. One is, you talk about the leakage from transport and the supply chain, then you have to say it's not being measured. So we have a tool to measure it, and without having to put the devices in every truck, we have a creative advanced technology that allows us to monitor the movements without being on individual trucks, which gives us live visibility and an ability to scale at a whole different level at a fraction of the cost. So now every transport move on trucks and trains in future is visible, right? So that has to come through in a really tight way. The other one, by the way, is what am I going to do with that? Okay, great. I'm tracking carbon emissions, and now you can measure your carbon leakage. But now that I have that, what are the things I can do to improve it? Well, 1/2 to 1/3 of all trucking deliveries are one way. They're coming back empty. They're not planning, like in Indonesia and China and India, and even in the US, a lot of these are one-way runs and they come back, especially when they're going in cities. So now that you see that, now we can also, we can extend with new technologies and other companies to optimize the way these trucks are being deployed and their returns. And so one is to measure the carbon footprints using GPS and your new technology. The other is to then use it to impact the way the trucks are being utilized to bring down the carbon emissions, right? That's the part that I'm looking at. So I'm glad you measure it, but then how are we going to use the measurement to bring it down?
I got it.
And one way is clear, just on optimizing runs. So just planning a truck when they do a delivery, how they bring back haul cargo, that can reduce the carbon footprint by 1/3. And increase profitability. So I wouldn't mind you just mentioning that, when we do this optimally, we can bring in other tools at the second stage to bring down costs and reduce carbon footprint and increase profitability for our customers. But it all has to come through in a minute and a half.
So Paul, you're talking
Muy
about
fácil, ¿verdad?
So Francisco, your third party, these are the transport, and what happens is they have GPS, they might have satellites. And Paul, what you're saying is that utilizing that information, it kind of allows people to get a glimpse of their scope 3 emissions and hopefully being able to try to track it first. And then what you're also saying is, because you're doing this anyways, you can aim to improve the process, right? So for instance, if goods are being delivered, returns can be delivered on the train back to save emissions. Does that make sense? If I'm working with somebody, if I have like a t-shirt supplier, for instance, does that make sense, Paul? Right, on a very basic level.
Yeah, well, example, a truck goes out of Jakarta and it does a delivery in the suburbs, an hour and a half away, and then it comes back empty.
Yes.
But you want to plan it. Now, what's one of the problems? In the past, the truckers will also say, why do I want to measure and tell everyone about my carbon leakage and the damage I'm doing to the environment? I mean, that's bad for my marketing image. So how do you win them over? You win them over by saying, that's the first phase. The second phase is we can then bring in tools that will help you plan optimization of routing of the trucks, and backhaul matching and other tools that will allow you to increase your profit, optimize the utilization of the trucks, and reduce your carbon footprint, and then tell everyone you're reducing the carbon footprint. That's how you win them over, right?
Yeah, because the way I look at this, right, and Francisco, I will pitch your idea today, just because I just want to pitch it to you. I feel like, do you know what I mean?
He's the
Paul,
best at pitching. He's always the best at pitching.
No, but I want to pitch this idea because I want to see if I can elevate, but I do want you, Francisco, to work on your 1 minute pitch again, right? Because I think there's something missing here. Mitch and Paul, I'm just wondering, like, who his customer really is, right?
Yeah,
because
that came to, yeah.
Did it? Mitch, I'm reading your mind today, Mitch. We're having So what's happening is, for me, Francisco, as you're talking, okay, part of your pitch is to really understand your customer. And so Paul, he started off by saying there's companies out there that need to understand their scope 3 emissions, right? Okay. And then he talks about the fact that he's working with transport companies, truck companies, and all this stuff with their GPS trackers to give them. But for me, I actually think it's the other way around, Francisco. I actually think your customer might be the transport industry.
I agree.
Okay? Right? Because what happens is now, as a trucker, right, if I'm transporting stuff, right, I have your tools and all the other elements to report carbon emissions to the companies that need it. And on top of that, you are improving my utilization as well, right? Not just to make me more money, but I'm also more carbon neutral, right? And that, I think, is really interesting, right, Mitch and Paul? Does that resonate with you?
Ash, it goes back to, depending how the trucking fleet is used, it goes back to the 3PL logistics company managing the whole logistics operations.
Yes.
It goes back to the freight forwarders, or sometimes Nestle, as an example, or Unilever. They will manage this process themselves in country. So it's one of those touch points that look at a bigger level, and the trucking is part of is a execution across their nodes of product distribution. Yeah. So those are like 3 key touch points that are actually the customer.
But does that make sense?
And a company like Nestle or Unilever or even Kuehne + Nagel, they're now under pressure to show what are you doing to reduce your carbon footprint as a marketing tool and to bring down costs. So then they will basically put the pressure on the local trucking networks.
Yes. Mitch.
The other thing is that from a sales perspective, if you have 5 partners who sell the benefits of your service rather than having to go to 5,000 customers to sell the benefits of your partner's service, you're in a much better position.
Yes, absolutely. So, Francisco, how many customers do you have already? How many? You've gotten some traction already, right?
Yes.
Tell me about your.
Well, the example of Paul, it's to me applies because I work here in Chile with mining companies. So mining companies, they have pressure to reduce the scope 3 emissions, and they rely on many small and medium-sized transport companies that they lack the finances to reduce their emissions. For example, switching to electric vehicles. So the mining company has the money, has the smart people, but they can obligate to their contractors to move. So that's the twist that we're doing it, because as we get data from third-party GPS of those trucks, with that data, we go to the mining company and we told them, okay, this is the best area to you can work with your supplier to make efficient the scope 3 emissions. And we also connecting with the finance sector to put money in there, because that money as a green investment has a better yield than conventional investments. Yes. So it's more like a triangle of 3 touch points in the financial sector, on the SME transport companies, and in the big corporations.
Absolutely. So I know, so you got some initial traction in the mining industry, and I think that makes a lot of sense. And that also makes sense for a place like Chile, because there's still there's a lot of mining happening there, right? It just, you happen to be in the right place too. So I think that kind of needs to be part of the journey, right? You're looking for $500,000 of investment, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And
and sorry to interrupt. I don't want you, when you say you want $500,000 you're raising, don't put in your pitch for 7% of the company. Don't
Okay.
You're already weakening your negotiating position. And I'd rather you just say we're raising 500,000 to now go to the next level and build out across Chile and advance the technology to the next step. Don't talk about the valuation.
Yeah.
Right. Noted.
Got it. All right, Francisco, with no preparation, I'm happy to do this. I don't know if anyone else wants to give it a shot.
Good
right?
comments, Mitch.
I know Mitch has put some really good information in the chat in terms
I
of
prefer to write rather than speak, particularly at 7 o'clock in the morning, my time.
Good
Yeah,
stuff.
it's a little bit early. All right. So I'm gonna attempt, right? But we do want to we're gonna ask you to come back and do your elevator pitch again. But Francisco, introduce yourself, and I will pitch your idea back to you. Okay.
Okay. So Francisco, I work from the biggest company in the world, Codelco.
Okay.
So tell me, what do you have to reduce our emissions?
Sure, absolutely. As you know, most companies like yourself have addressed the scope 1, scope 2 about your current emissions, your incidental emissions. But our focus as a company is going to be the next generation monitoring solution for scope 3 emissions, right? Your supply chain. What we've been able to do is we've successfully been able to launch our platform to allow the transportation industry to monitor their transit routes, and we are accurately giving them inputs in terms of their carbon emissions. And this is something that we are now providing to companies like yourself, along with other mining companies in Chile, where we've started off. We're looking to build this out and become the central node of information for scope 3 emissions, and be able to finalize and improve the third horizon of carbon emissions, which is supply chain. And we're looking for $500,000 to take this to the next level. We have a couple of customers already, and we think that with a little bit of financial support, we can make this a permanent fixture to help climate change. Thank you. Okay.
Right.
So I tried to do that in a minute, right? I brought in the scope 3. I brought some of these other components in place. Okay. I want to jump in a little bit more on the tech component. How does it actually weave together, right? Because we didn't get time to talk about the secret sauce, because that brings it all together, right? But basically, for me, I see you as a company that's going to own, like, you need to have people that are going to be leaders in this space, right? And so the green star approval, right, for scope 3 emissions needs to happen from them, right, Mitch? Is that correct?
Yeah, and certification in the long run is going to be critical to the reportability of this information.
Yes, absolutely. So, Francisco, thank you for your time today. I appreciate your time today. It was fun. And look forward to seeing how this evolves, and congratulations. The world needs your product, right? So we're really excited that you've been part of the Hyper Accelerator, and look forward to seeing where this goes. Thank you very much. Thank you.